So here is today's story. Beware the Brindlebeast. Retold and illustrated by Anita Riggio. So apparently if this is retold and illustrated, it means that it was somebody else's story. And we don't know whose story it is. So she might have told it in a new way and then she did the pictures for it. So, and this book's a little special because, what does this mean? Somebody wrote in this book. What does this mean? So, who knows what this means? When there is something that somebody wrote in here. Now, does it look like somebody was just like playing? Well, if you look here, it says Anita Riggio. Who wrote the book? Anita Riggio. So this book was signed by the author, which is kind of a big deal. So she wrote her name, she wrote Warm Wishes, Anita Riggio, and then she put a jack-o'-lantern. All right, so I'm gonna zoom out again. So let's look at the setting. What can you tell me about the setting in this story?
Fall.
It's fall, so that tells us a time.
The leaves are falling.
The leaves are falling, so it's fall.
Changing colors.
It's changing colors. Does this look like it's from nowadays or the olden days? What tells you that it's olden days? Well, sort of. The sky does that now. How about her clothes? Does that look like how women dress now? No. It's a little bit more old-fashioned. So, Birdie was a cheerful old woman who lived with her marmalade cat in a bitty cottage just outside the village. She was surely poor, but got along one way or another and was glad of it. To earn a living, Birdie did chores for the housewives in the hamlet. They gave her a meal at noontime, plus a supper of stale bread and hard cheese, and insist that Birdie begins work at dawn's light so she could be safely home before darkness fell. For all the villagers were afraid of the dread Brindlebeast who roamed the village at night, changing itself into frightful forms and scaring the gentle village folk right out of their wits. Beware of the Brindlebeast, the housewives warned Birdie. Beware indeed. So you see here's like a shadow of her, and it looks like she's shaking out a rug. Now, it was All Hallows Eve, the very night of lurking goblins and ghosties. The evening star winked at the rows of weathered gravestones as Birdie hastened homeward past the old burying ground. What's All Hallows Eve? Halloween. That got changed into Halloween. A black cat darted across her path and vanished into the shadows. Birdie gathered her shawl closer and, looking after the cat, nearly tripped over a great black kettle squatting there, smack in the middle of the road. Now, who could have left this here, she said, standing over it with her great gnarled hand on her hip. It's a fine pot, to be sure. Birdie scanned the field before her and the road behind her, but not a soul did she see. She shifted her basket. It's likely to have a hole, I suppose. Still, it would make a handsome tub for my blue asters. Maybe I'll help myself to it anyways. And with that thought, she crouched down, knees creaking, and lifted the lid to look inside. What do you think is going to be inside?
The Brindlebeast.
We'll see. Mercy! Birdie gasped. It's full to the brim with gold pieces. Jaw to chest, Birdie gaped at the gold, wondering at her good luck. Birdie could hardly take her eyes from the treasure. My, she mumbled. How shall I get this kettle home? After several moments, Birdie scrambled to her feet and tied one end of her shawl around the pot. Then, step by step, she dragged the kettle homeward, humming as she went. My goodness, she said, interrupting her tune. Think of the fine home I could have with polished wooden floors and patterned rugs, embroidered linens, and the finest china teacups. Why, fancy inviting the village housewives to tea. Under the gaze of the gleaming moon, Bertie crossed the narrow footbridge. The dusk crept behind her across the meadows, slipping into snug places, tucking itself into its burrows and hollows. Bertie glanced over her shoulder. Goodness gracious, she cried in surprise. My pot of gold has turned into a barrel of apples. And so it had. She stood over the barrel blinking. I could have sworn this was a kettle of gold, she said at last, but this must have been only a lovely dream. Oh well, a stout barrel of apples is still a fine treasure. And with that, Bertie picked up the end of her shawl and set off homeward, dragging the barrel behind her. There will be apples enough to make cobblers and pies to share, said Bertie, and still there will be some left to store in the root cellar over winter. What good luck! Bertie reached the great sycamore at the foot of her own little knoll. Night spread like a blanket across the meadow. Bertie wheeled around. Now that beats all, she cried. Instead of a barrel of apples, there's a fat pumpkin at the end of my shawl. And so it was. Then, said Bertie, well now, a pumpkin is just what I need to make a jack-o'-lantern for All Hallows Eve. And being ever so anxious to see how it would look, Bertie picked up the pumpkin and bustled up the hill to her tiny cottage. She stepped inside and shut the door. Outside, the wind began to wail. Wools of golden leaves skittered across Bertie's yard, over her doorstep, and pattered at her little wooden door. But Bertie set about carving her pumpkin just the same. Lucky me, Bertie chuckled, scooping it out. Such a treasure it'll make, a jolly jack-o'-lantern, and lots of pies as well. When she had finished, Bertie found a small candle to put inside the jack-o'-lantern and grandly placed the pumpkin on her doorstep. She retrieved a flaming twig from the hearth and touched the flame to the candle wick. When the wick took the flame, Bertie straightened her stiff back. There now, Bertie sighed, and stood for a moment to admire it. Nothing stirred, not a creature, not the wind, not the night. Suddenly, the pumpkin let out a high-pitched squeal. It hopped right off the doorstep and over Bertie. The jack-o'-lantern throbbed with a ferocious glow. It snorted fire from its nostrils. Flames burst from the top of its head, singeing the pumpkin cap. Heavens! Bertie cried. Before her astonished eyes, the jack-o'-lantern pitched and puckered and pulsed. The hideous thing swelled, and when it looked as if though it would burst, it shot out 4 muscled legs, shook out 2 cropped ears, and brandished a great flaxen tail. Shrieking something terrible, it reared its giant head, fiery eyes blazing in its sockets, and that beast bucked and kicked and thrashed, and nearly knocking over the little house right where it stood. Who's this? Ooh, the Brindlebeast. So who was the Brindlebeast with the whole time? Yeah, it was first the pot of gold, then it turned into the apples, then it turned to the
Pumpkin.
and then she made it into a jack-o'-lantern, and that turned into
Brindlebeast.
so it's definitely changing its skin, huh? All right. Just then. Oh, does she look scared? She's pretty brave, huh? Just then a little smile flickered in Bertie's eyes. Folding her arms across her bosom, she said, well, this is my lucky day. Fancy me having the dread Brindlebeast all to myself, and not another soul around to join the fun. Fun? Bellowed the beast. I do not intend this to be fun. Why you should be scared out of your wits like the rest of the gentle village folk. Bertie sashayed back and forth, a smile dancing in her eyes. Is that so? She replied. Yes, that's so, the Brindlebeast wailed. Most folks fear and curse me and are jolly well frightened to pieces. Well, I am not, said Bertie, poking the beast's belly with her crooked finger. Why, goodness gracious, your company made my walk home so much more exciting. Besides, there's no harm done. Look here, I still have a bit of cheese and bread for my supper, so thank you, Brindlebeast, and a good eve to you. With that, Bertie gathered up her shawl around her shoulders, stepped right past the Brindlebeast to her own little door, and went inside. But turning back to eye the beast one last time, she saw not a beast, but a little fellow shuffling his feet on Bertie's doorstep. Ho, Bertie started. Nothing more than spit and fire and smoke, was it? Then she let out a great sigh. Well now, would you care to share some supper? Don't mind if I do, the Brindlebeast answered. Who is the Brindlebeast?
That little thing.
The little guy. So they sat down to supper, and somehow that bitty wedge of cheese grew to 6 times its size. In a twinkling there appeared some nicely browned boiled eggs and several biscuits for their tea. They made a cheerful meal of it, and when they had finished, they sat by Bertie's cozy fire. Then Bertie listened to the Brindlebeast's tales until her sides ached with laughter and tears rolled down her plump cheeks. I don't know when an evening's been so quickly spent, she said, dabbing her eyes with a hanky. Over time, the little fellow came often for a bit of supper and chats by the fire. And when Bertie found her woodpile stacked as high as the roof and her cupboard stocked with biscuits and cheese aplenty, she very wisely said nothing about it to anyone. The gentle village folk still spoke in terrified tones of the dread Brindlebeast. But Bertie never let on, save for the little smile that flickered in her eyes. So that was our dread Brindlebeast story. So, she's pretty brave, huh? Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's pretty smart, too. She knew it couldn't hurt her.
It's like the little lady wasn't scared.
Yeah, so we've read a couple of stories about being brave, huh? All right.